This episode is sponsored by Therapy Notes, therapynotes.com. Be sure and check them out and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, Gordon, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. Over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way, and I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. This is episode number 296 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer and glad you're with me on this journey and glad you're listening to the podcast. If this is your first time stumbling upon us or listening to the podcast, welcome. And for those of you that are coming back, glad you're back with us and hope you'll all take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. So I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest and my conversation with Diana Rice. And Diana is a professional counselor in Florida, and she has had just a really interesting career, done a lot of different things from acting of one thing and being in the film industry to working in the school setting and also public mental health as far as agency settings, and just a lot of great different diverse things she's done in her career. And in our conversation, we really kind of talk about her journey, which is, as I mentioned in the podcast, is one of the main reasons I started this podcast, is get to talk to a lot of great people about their own stories and all that they've gone through in starting their own private practices. But Diana was particularly interesting. We talked about different tragedies that we've all gone through in recent years, from school shootings to 9/11 to, you name it, and all of the stuff, and just how we've persevered through it. We also talk about some of how her faith has influenced what she does in her practice. But I'm looking forward to you hearing from Diana. But before we get to that, I'd love for you to go over and check out the Practice Launch Club. And you can find out more about that by going to practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And the Practice Launch Club is a membership community, particularly for those folks just getting started in private practice. And I put it together specifically to provide support and community for those folks getting started, because it can be kind of a lonely place trying to navigate all the stuff. But with that Practice Launch Club, we meet 2 times a month via Zoom. And also there is a library of little mini courses and tutorials on just different aspects of running a private practice, along with some other resources, paperwork packets, all that kind of thing. It's all included in the membership, along with a online community connected with that. In addition to our Zoom meetings, you have access to the Practice Launch Club membership area on the Circle platform, which is where we interact and ask questions and talk with each other in between our meeting times. So I encourage you to go check it out at practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And if you're listening to this before the end of the month of September in 2023, be sure and use the promo code just PLC Fall 2023, and you can get $20 off your monthly membership using that promo code. And also, before we get to my conversation with Diane, I'd love for you to hear from one of our members of the Psychcraft network, along with our sponsor of the podcast, Therapy Notes.
Hey there. If we haven't met, my name is Lisa Mustard, and I'm the person behind the scenes of the Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard, a podcast where I interview seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapists from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. Plus, you can also earn continuing education contact hours from some of my episodes. So, to learn more about the show and get your first continuing education contact hour for free, head on over to my site, lisamustard.com.
One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a system like Therapy Notes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. Therapy Notes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. Your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. Be sure to check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes and be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to you hearing from Diana Rice. Hi, Diana. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Yeah. We were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and I'm real excited for you all to hear her story. When I started this podcast, it was exactly for this reason, for people to be able to tell, clinicians to be able to tell their story about their journey into private practice and the meaning it's creating in their lives and that sort of thing. So, Diana, as I start with everyone, tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed. I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it is. Well, the first time I ever heard the word counseling is when I was a peer counselor in middle school, at Crystal Lake Middle School in Broward County. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try out this class. And then in 7th grade, we had a tragedy happen where one of our fellow classmates drowned at the lake, at Crystal Lake. And at that point, I remember my teacher, Mr. Tillman, say, all right, Diana, everything you were taught in this class, let's get to work. I mean, I'm how old? 12, 13 years old. And I took it seriously. And at that point, I think that is when the seed was planted. And I took it to heart. I am a highly sensitive therapist. And I come from a background of, I'm a BIPOC therapist, a Black, Indigenous, people of color therapist. And I come from the inner city, and I grew up with a single immigrant mom. And so we didn't have resources. And so to me, that counseling class was my resource for not only myself, but then I was learning how to help others as well.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how I think even at earlier ages, I think sometimes people recognize in us, those of us in this field, just kind of a talent or a penchant for being able to be a helper and a listener and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so 7th grade happened, 8th grade happened. I felt such a connection and a sense of purpose because I came, like I said, from a background of dysfunctionality, which, I see now healed trauma equals wisdom. And so just looking back and looking back, I'm grateful, even through all the pain and suffering and understanding. And this is my journey, just like everyone listening has their own journey and their own story to tell, especially if you're a practitioner, if you're a therapist or a social worker or a marriage family therapist, psychologist, whatever it is that you are in the mental health field. Understanding there is a reason you started this, right? And it definitely wasn't for the money.
Right. Yeah. That's so true. But I think it's interesting, as I've talked with, so many different therapists across the country and across the world. One theme that runs through all of that is that we all have our own experiences and hardships in life that have kind of steered us in a direction. And I think when we recognize our own healing from that, recovery from those things, it really inspires us to want to help others in the same way.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's sometimes I feel that, sorry, that's the calling that we get, because I am in tuned spiritually. I mean, I'm a Christian BIPOC therapist, but I take everybody, honestly. If you look at my website, you'll get the vibe that I have. Right. Sorry. And understanding like the journey, like I started off not only in 7th grade, then in high school, I was a peer counselor as well. And then we had more tragedy. And that was in the 80s when crack started. And we had a situation in the high school where someone accidentally shot their best friend and they were high on crack. And so this is happening in my school systems, in the Broward County schools. And I had to, once again, like I took it seriously. There's other people that took the class and it was just for fun. But I think just due to how I am and who I am now I realize like back in the day, I thought differently than a lot of people. And it's due to my own complex PTSD, but as well as just how my brain functioned. Like it was super like serious for me. Sure. I mean, I moved off and I am known amongst my peers that I grew up with, like, fun loving and everything. But at the same time, deep inside, I was just like, no, somebody's hurting. Somebody needs another person. And so that teacher, Mr. Hilton, was like, all right, Diana, here we go. You got to take what I'm teaching you seriously now. Your peers need you. So it was like, your peers need you. Your peers need you. And I remember in the high school yearbook, I wrote, they asked the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said a psychologist, but things didn't go exactly that way. Honestly, I didn't have money. I didn't know what I was. I was the first one to graduate high school on my mom's side of the family who was raising me. She's from South America. And, she came with that American dream. And I'm grateful for how she raised me now. That made me tough. But at the same time, that toughness, because I'm a BIPOC therapist in South Florida with a lot of immigrant families, I get those teenagers. That's my specialty. I work with adolescents.
Wow.
And so I worked with, high school, middle school, and that's kind of my niche right now. People know me as the therapist with adolescents. I worked at alternative schools most of my time in the therapist in Broward County. So it's like I never left Broward. And now I get back to my community. And in July of 2020, God said, while I was working at the alternative school, you're going to open up your own private practice. And I fought it. I was like, no, thank you. No. Actually, it was May, because March was when the shutdown happened. The pandemic happened, and I was working at that high school, and all of a sudden, here we are having to learn how to go on these Zoom meetings, how to just do everything online. And I'm working with teenagers in an alternative school, trying to get them not to hurt others or hurt themselves. I was the only therapist at the school at the time. So anyway, all of a sudden, God's like, yeah, you're going to open this up in July. And I'm just like, no. So I worked during the day at the school. And then in the evenings, I started taking 1 or 2 clients at a time. And here I am now 3 years later in my own private practice full time.
Wow. Yeah. So that's a great kind of maybe to shift gears. I know obviously your spirituality and your beliefs and your faith are a big part of who you are. What was that process like when maybe this is a bad use of words, but when you pulled the trigger to change from school work, agency / school work into private practice, what all went into that decision for you?
Oh, goodness. Well, I am married to a businessman, and I'm really grateful for that. I also, back in 2012, had to take a break from I was a registered intern at the time. My youngest son, the one who made this vivarium, palarium, whatever it's called, he had a traumatic brain injury. And so I had to quit working at the agency. At that time, I was working for a place called a nonprofit called Friends of Children. And I was going into the homes and the schools of my clients. And so I had to quit to homeschool him for about 2 years. And at that time, I started studying the brain a lot. And even before that, when I was in my internship at one of the Broward County schools, I was noticing like a lot of these young kids were being diagnosed, and most people around them, the adults, the psychiatrists, the psychiatric nurses, that they cared more about the diagnosis and they weren't listening to the kids. And I was an intern learning, these were all my guinea pigs. I hate to say it that way, but that's what internship is. You got all the book smart, but now here you are in your internship going,
yeah,
oh, now I have to apply it. So I started learning and listening and understanding, like being in this school system here, which I am a product of the Broward County school system. Like, I get it. It's a whole different vibe in South Florida. South Florida should be its own state, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, it was just a place where I left that agency to homeschool. I already had this open mind of there has to be other ways to deal with mental disease or illness or unhealthiness, because what was happening wasn't working. Like it was just, I saw the anger in the kids. I saw the depression in them and I realized what was working was me, that unconditional positive regard that Carl Rogers talks about.
Right.
It's just listen and let them feel validated and heard. So as I started doing that and started worrying more about who they are, they're like, you're not going to ask me about this. You're not. And I'm like, not at this time, unless you want me to. I let them lead the sessions and they realized like I was genuine with them. And I wanted to meet them where they were and are. I mean, I'm still like that therapist, just a little more fine-tuned. Anyway, so back to 2012, my son has that accident and I still am learning about holistic measures because I realized a lot of these kids were having side effects, but nobody cared about how they were eating or sleeping or even pooping. Like, and I know that sounds weird, but it's like, wait, we're whole beings. And I became a disciple of Jesus in 2000. So my faith was really into play as well. I never pushed my faith on anybody. Plus, I could get in trouble in a public school system. So it was just like, I'm a woman of prayer. And I ask every morning for guidance and understanding of first do no harm. And so after that accident, I started just having to be the advocate for my son. And I learned even more about, neurobiology, neuroplasticity, just the understanding of like, is there other ways that we can help his brain? And I found a book called Nourish Your Noggin in the library. And I started that. And I love studying and researching and reading. And, it's like I'm a lifelong learner. So after 2 years, he got himself into high school and I chose a different career and I went totally away from being a therapist.
Wow. Yeah. So what'd you do? Just curious.
I went into the South Florida film industry.
Wow.
Yeah. I had a friend from middle school and she was a producer in New York and she was here visiting and she asked to take pictures and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have some. I needed fun in my life because I went through that trauma, vicarious trauma with your son and just doing what you do for a living. Like we all, us practitioners, we have that compassion fatigue, we have vicarious trauma, we could have burnout, and we have to understand those things as a therapist, because sometimes we go trying to help everybody else, not understanding your subconscious is picking all this stuff up.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, if you're not caring for yourself and putting that oxygen tank on first, and then you're wondering, why am I feeling these certain ways? Or I'm over this, it's because you're out of balance. Anyway, I was totally out of balance at that time. And so I needed some fun in my life. And so she's like, take these pictures. They're looking for ethnically ambiguous women like you. You're over 40. Why don't you send the pictures to the agencies in Florida and see what happens? And within 1 month, I had 3 agents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So was it modeling or actually doing some acting, or what was involved?
It was all of it. At first, it was like lifestyle commercials, just extra work, whatever I got my hands on, and that would actually pay me, And I got bit by the bug and I loved it. And then while I was on set, I'm that nerdy person where I'm with a little notebook and a pad, and everybody else is like, and I'm sitting there just taking notes, like, okay, so this guy behind the camera is doing this, and that person, what? And then I would ask questions. And then I ended up behind the camera. I ended up becoming a producer, a PA, set decorator for different companies. I think my favorite was becoming a casting director for student films for Palm Beach Atlantic University.
Wow. Wow. That is fascinating. That is fascinating.
I loved it. I loved being in that industry a lot. But honestly, because I am an open book therapist, it was hard on my family in a way. I mean, I was having so much fun, and I just realized like I needed this. And this, I've always been a real creative. It's just due to the circumstances of my childhood and everything, I was not in a place where that was encouraged, because that's just not how it is. It's just like, you're just trying to survive in the inner city.
Right.
Not all of us, because I'm not going to stereotype, but in my realm of influence and understanding, that's what I saw. It's like, we're trying to, when you don't have resources, or you don't have, a healthy family unit, or even an environment that is positive around you, and all you're seeing is like surviving, there's neighborhoods around here where, you're watching your friend get shot down playing basketball. I mean, these are the kids I would work with. And it's not, I never saw that kind of tragedy, but I saw some. I grew up in New York, by the way. I came to South Florida when I was 12 or 11th grade. I came to South Florida, but I grew up in Queens, New York.
Yeah.
So anyway, so for 6 years, I would say from 2014 to 2018, 13, 12, 18. Yeah, because I'm still like, God still gives me a little gig here and there. I love it. Once in a while, like every year, he's like, somebody out of the blue says, hey, you want to do a commercial or something? And I'm like, yeah, sure, and I get excited. But I also understand that being a therapist is the actual purpose that I'm in this world. And that was clear when 2018, when the Parkland Stoneman Douglas shooting happened. And that happened in February. And I was still working in the industry. And I had a few families that remembered that I was a therapist. And they asked, hey, can you come and help? But my license was gone. Like I let everything go. I was in a career. And then little by little, my agents and work just started diminishing in the film industry. And I knew right then God was calling me back. And I'm like, no, please, Lord, no, please, no. This is not about you, woman. And so by September of 2018, I got the job at the alternative school in Broward as the crisis intervention counselor. And basically they were like, listen, we have a lot of hurting teens. The whole state of Florida probably was feeling this whole thing that happened to us, especially Broward County, especially Parkland. And I live in the town right next to Parkland, Deerfield Beach.
Wow.
And teenagers now, they would see social media and everything. They all felt it. I mean, I don't care where you were. They knew each other. A lot of them, they meet at different places. And even though they might be separated from schools, even private schools, even charter schools, I learned that, with all the social media, they knew each other locally. Like,
wow.
So anyway, yeah, the principal, I'll never forget. He's like, hey, listen, we have to create this together. I don't even know where to start with this, but every school received a grant for mental health because of that. And that's where I came back into being a therapist and back, working in the school system.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that led to, it's interesting because then there was this whole phenomenon of the pandemic with COVID, and that caused a whole other shift for, I guess, lots of ways. Yeah.
Yes. Because I really listened to like what my gut instinct, I don't know, Holy Spirit, whatever you're feeling to call it, I know what it is inside of me. And I'm still, I had to learn to be still in my own healing. I had to learn to just take that deep breath and be Mary and not Martha. If anybody understands that's listening.
Yeah. Right.
And because I'm I'm just that type A, anxious, anxiety, and at the same time, I had to realize this is not about me, and I have to be still to listen. I'm really good with empathy and listening to others. But when it was for myself, that guilt and that shame that was embedded from your past, it's just like, no, you're not worthy of that. And that inner critic, I had to shrink that inner critic. So I did. I've done EMDR. I try basically everything I try. And then I encourage my clients to either go and get that done separately, or, we work things out in my own private practice. And because I'm not everybody's cup of tea, they have to figure out like where they're going to get their healing. Some people outgrow me, and that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So with that being said, it's been an interesting ride. So September of 2021 is when the school let me go. Wow. And I'm not going to go into that because everybody has their own opinion of what happened back then. And I realized at that moment, wow, God, you prepared me in 2020 for what was to come. And I'm so grateful. So back to the pandemic, when that shutdown happened at the same time in the end of December of 2019 and the beginning of January and then February of 2020, we had tragedy in Deerfield Beach. We had local high school students, Deerfield Beach high school students, who died by suicide. And it happened like it was that, and this is before the pandemic. And I'm working at the alternative school. And I grew up in Deerfield. So I live in Deerfield. I grew up in Deerfield. I went to Deerfield High. So that's my heart there, my own high school. And so we had that tragedy. Somebody, he died by suicide. Then a couple of weeks later, another football player was killed at a funeral. I think it was gang related. And then a couple of weeks later, another scholar athlete did the same and died by suicide. And so we had that tragedy on top of Parkland in Deerfield. And then I'm a therapist, but I'm seeing, and then the pandemic hits.
Yeah.
And so it was just like a whirlwind of like, whoa. But in my instinct, all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, I need to learn. So I found a webinar, and I don't know if you have ever heard of Dwight Bain. Dwight Bain.
Not familiar. Yeah.
He's been a trauma therapist who's done natural disasters, killings, mass shootings, and just like 9/11, like he had, and to me, that was my instinct to go into that kind of training. Cause I'm like, okay, like a natural disaster. I need to learn like And he's done it for so long. So he had a training and I went on it, and I'll never forget because he had like a whole like calendar of like, okay, what I've seen in years, after a couple of years, this is what you'll see in the group. And, and so I just hung on every one of his words. I took every webinar I possibly could on trauma. I took every Zoom call and meeting with peers to just keep learning so I could be effective and stay focused on helping not only my clients, but for me to stay. I mean, like, hey, us therapists, we're human beings.
Right.
And I think people like on the outside forget that therapists are humans, doctors are humans, right? Firefighters are humans,
Right.
And so it's like, we're not super power people. Like, we might have these trainings, but we still have our personal lives.
Right.
So,
yeah. And finding that balance.
Right.
Of, all of that sort of thing. Yeah. Well, one of the things that occurs to me as you were, telling your story, Diana, is I think when we find, to put it in, I identify as a Christian as well. And one of the things that I think, to put it in that vernacular and kind of these terms, is kind of the finding the path or the will of God, or however you prefer to couch that. And I recognize that there are people listening that's not their thing, which is okay.
Yeah.
But I think when you find that right path, things just kind of open up for you. And when you're on that right path, it just, things become easier and things fall into place and that sort of thing. And so I kind of hear that in your story a little bit, and moving into private now. Yeah.
So with the private practice, like for anyone that's either in it or is considering it, it is you really because they don't teach this in school. I know in my school, they didn't teach anything about business.
Right.
And I'm grateful that I'm married to a businessman. I'm grateful that I had to have my own production company for a minute. It's kind of like, and being in the film industry, I was sort of my own CEO. You know what I mean? Because I hate to say it, but I had to sell myself, right? This is what acting and modeling and just producing whatever. You need to get the gig to pay your bill. It's the same mentality. So I noticed that everything I learned in the film industry, as I am moving into my own private practice, that is what helped me. It's like understanding, like, okay, I am my own brand. I am my own CEO. I am, like, what is my mission statement? What is my purpose of understanding? It's like, because we get overwhelmed and we're not, like I said, we're not taught this in school, which is pretty sad, because I think we should all, no matter your career. Right?
Yeah. And that's the whole reason I started this podcast and the stuff that I'm doing is that I know that there's so many of us out there that, my journey has some parallel features to yours, in that I worked in an agency that worked with at-risk children and youth and their families, and did the intensive in-home therapy and all of that kind of thing. And so you see that whole side of things, but it also can lead to a lot of burnout. And then if you're burnt out, like you were talking about earlier on, you're not going to be of any help to anyone. And so being able to, the thing that I love about private practice is that you get to kind of control more of your path, and also be able to, do the self-care. I mean, it was, I've shared before on the podcast, I'm in a situation now with my wife, and that she's now terminally ill, and we've got hospice involved and that sort of thing. But this whole journey started back in 2000. She was first diagnosed in 2010.
Wow.
And so that was the point at which I started making the transition to go into private practice. And if I had not had done that, it would be that, her care would have been an impossible task. Plus my daughter was going into high school then, and all of that sort of thing. And so, it's private practice has afforded me the time and the freedom and the autonomy to be able to do all of those things. So, yeah.
I noticed like what you're saying, because, like I said before, we are humans with our own personal lives that we have to function in and work through and do our own self-care and ask for our own help, right? It's okay. We do not need to have all the answers. With the private practice, though, I think for me, it's the balance like you were talking about, like, especially if you have seen like what we've seen, like in that agency. I think most people that come out of school, that's the first job they can get, right? It's like you do your time. That's like your internship. You got to do your time. And that's probably the best teacher, honestly, because you're seeing everything. Everything that you learned in that DSM, which by the way, if CPTSD was in that DSM, that big old fat book would be a little pamphlet, but that's But at the same time, it's the guilt that we have. Because I know I had guilt because I know the need out there, right? I know the need of, and people can't afford quality therapy. And in that is where I had to learn to balance, because to me, my heart is for my BIPOC community. It is for my inner city clientele. It is for the single mom. It is for where I came from. At the same time, I have to be a businesswoman.
Right.
And see how that just is like, well, and then I am a Christian, right? I am. And so it's like, balancing like the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and it's like, you see what I mean? And then and so I have learned, like, you have to understand, like, to be in that private practice, it's okay to charge what you're worth.
Yes
Right. And I have come with my boundaries, right? I'll take 2 pro bono cases per year, and I will I will try to find the client other, the agency or the resource. And then, there are certain families that I will do a sliding scale, but that isn't how I do everything. Because listen, I live in South Florida. You know how hot it is here? I have to pay for AC.
Right.
I have to pay for light. I have to eat. I have to take care of myself, as well.
Because if you didn't, you couldn't take care of the people that you're passionate about.
Right. And so it was me working in the last 3 years, because remember, I'm coming from that alternative school, from the agency, from seeing things like, oh my goodness. And I also had to realize this: I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm not here to save the world. I'm here to love others. Right? I'm here to love others, and then utilize my gifts and talents to help move the kingdom forward in those talents and gifts, and survive and thrive in the world that God has given me, like here in my community. So it was learning how to balance all these things. And that takes time. That takes, introspection. That takes own healing, because guess what? You're going to get triggered by other people in your practice. Right.
Oh, boy. Yeah, Diana, this is great stuff. And I've got to be aware of our time, and I hope we can continue this conversation here in the future. But so tell folks how they can get in touch with you if they would like to find out more about you and the work you're doing.
Sure. My website is throughthevalley.com, or you can find me on Instagram. I am not no big social media buff. I try my best, and you'll see once, if you see my Instagram, you're going to be like, "Whoa, this girl's cheesy," but that's okay. That's okay, because I'm not here to please people. I'm here to please God, because if pleasing people were my goal, I wouldn't be a servant of Christ. So, and just check out my website. You'll get a good vibe of who I am, and I'm part of your tribe or not. And if I am, then, reach out to me. Like I said, I'm an open book. I try to respond to people at least within 24 hours if I don't have my own emergency. Like, I hear you, Gordon, about the hospice thing, because I just got a call yesterday from my sister, and she's been battling cancer for a long time. And they said, they've only given her 6 months to live right now.
Wow.
And so like it's balanced, but I also know like her faith, and I know my faith, and whoever's listening, it's not about guilting or shaming you into understanding your purpose or faith or whatever. I just want you to understand, like, you are loved by an almighty creator, and you have this purpose and calling, and it's scary. And walking by faith and not by sight, it's like, whoa, it's hard. But life wasn't meant to be easy. It wasn't. And now you have a tribe. I mean, Gordon created this tribe. Like, I already feel like connected to Gordon. See, I just met the dude. So
well, you're kind to say that. And I can't agree with you more. It's about community. It's about knowing that you're not alone. And that there are people and something greater than ourselves that's walking along beside you through the whole journey. So well, Diana, we'll have the links to your website and your social media for folks easy to find in the show notes here. And I hope that we can continue this conversation here later before too long. Well, again, a big thanks to Diana for joining me on the podcast. And, I really enjoyed my conversation with her. She has got such a diverse background and is really doing some really interesting stuff. And also, I just appreciate her passion for what she does and all that she's contributing to our fields. And be sure and check out her things by going to her website. And you can find the links here in the show notes and the show summary. Also, be sure and check out the Practice Launch Club, particularly if you're just getting started in private practice. I'd love you to join this membership community. We just have a good time discussing different aspects of starting a private practice, and along with just the support and community that it can bring you. So check it out at practiceoftherapy.com/launch club. And remember to use the promo code just PLC Fall 2023 through the end of September of 2023, and you can get $20 off your membership fee per month. So check that out. And also, again, a big thanks to Therapy Notes for being the sponsor of the podcast. They are the leading electronic health record system. Sorry, my tongue got tied there. For mental health providers. They're who I use in my practice and absolutely love their platform. It has just made the running of my practice so much easier, and it's so user-friendly, not only for the therapist in my practice, but also our patients or our clients that use the portal that they provide. So be sure and check it out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapy notes, and be sure and use the promo code Gordon, just GORDON, to get 2 months of that for free to try it out. So be sure and check them out. Looking forward to you being back with me next week. We've got a lot of great guests lined up through the end of the year, really. It's amazing how many interviews we've gotten under our belt. I've had to take a little bit of a break so we can get caught up. So take care, folks, and we'll be back in your ears next week. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.